Miles Carrington didn't make reckless choices, not in the boardroom, not in life, and certainly not with women. At 35, he had mastered the art of control. He didn't gamble. He didn't guess. Everything he touched was calculated, from real estate to tech startups. His firm, Carrington Sky Investments, had grown from a desk in his mother's garage to a skyscraper office in Manhattan. Forbes called him unshakable. But even mountains shift when no one's watching. He hadn't planned to stay late at the Denver Financial Summit. He hated these networking events. Too many handshakes, too many fake smiles. But Carrington Sky was preparing to merge with a West Coast property group, and showing face was non-negotiable. So he did what he always did, stayed just long enough to make an impression, then disappeared. He made it to the hotel bar with loosened cufflinks and tired eyes. Across the room, she sat alone, a woman in a deep green dress. Nothing loud, no glitter, no forced laughter, just her, quiet, present, and sipping water from a stemless glass. Miles wasn't the type to approach women in public, especially not when he'd had 2 glasses of wine. But something about her made him pause. Maybe it was the way she scanned the room, observing without judging, or maybe it was the way her face relaxed like she didn't owe anyone an explanation. He slid into the seat beside her. "You don't look like someone who enjoys these events either," he said, voice low. She turned. Her lips curved just slightly. "And yet here you are. I could say the same." He extended a hand. "I'm Miles." She hesitated, then shook it. Talia. No last names, no business cards, no LinkedIn comparisons. For once, it felt honest. They talked for hours, about small things, big things, the way Denver skies looked just before a storm, how Talia worked 2 jobs and still found time to write poetry, how Miles hated the way people stared at his watch more than his words. She didn't ask what he did. He didn't ask where she lived. It was freedom, bottled in a moment. At one point, she laughed so hard she covered her face. Miles watched her fingers, delicate and clean, and wondered how a stranger's voice could make him forget boardrooms and deadlines. He didn't plan to kiss her. It just happened, right outside the elevator, after a joke about his lack of rhythm. It wasn't rushed, or messy. It was quiet and warm and slow, like they both knew the clock would run out, but kissed anyway. They didn't talk much inside the room. They didn't need to. It was connection, pure and undressed, not just skin, soul. No promises, no future talk, just the moment. When Miles woke up, it was still dark. She was asleep beside him, one hand curled beneath her cheek. He looked at her for a long time. For someone who hated unpredictability, he felt strangely calm. But then his phone buzzed, his assistant reminding him about the 6:30 a.m. departure. He got up silently, dressed, watched her for a few seconds longer, and walked out. No note, no name, just the assumption that they were both 2 adults who needed nothing more. He forgot her by breakfast, or tried to. She lingered at odd moments, in elevators, in red-eye flights, in rare quiet nights. He'd think of her laugh, or the way she said, "You talk like someone who doesn't sleep much." But Miles never chased ghosts. Until 2 years later, when that ghost appeared in his real life. Talia Monroe didn't expect much out of that night. She had gone to the hotel bar because her shoes were killing her and she needed water. Not cocktails, not compliments, definitely not company. She was only in Denver because her boss had asked her to deliver documents for a property deal. The law firm couldn't afford to send an executive assistant, so they asked her. The receptionist, who always said yes. She thought about going back to her room. She almost did. But something about the way he walked in, tall, unreadable, alone, made her stay seated. He didn't act like the others. No glances at her chest, no cheesy lines. Just quiet curiosity. When he sat beside her, she kept her walls up. For a while. But he didn't press. He didn't pretend to be interested in things he didn't understand. He actually listened, and so she let herself speak. She told him about her childhood in a cramped Chicago apartment, about her father, who disappeared when she was 10, about her love for quiet libraries and the smell of old books, about how she planned to finish her last semester of community college, eventually. He talked about the sky. She remembered that most. "The sky out here's different," he had said. "It's wide, unapologetic." She had looked up, pretending to understand. But when he said it, it didn't sound like fluff. It sounded like truth. Talia hadn't planned on going upstairs with him, but that night, something inside her softened. Not because she was weak, but because for once, she felt seen. They didn't ask about goals or resumes, no future, just the warmth of now, and it felt safe until morning. When she opened her eyes, he was gone. No name, no number, no note. Just the cold pillow beside her. She told herself it didn't matter, that it was what it was. A night, but she checked her phone 3 times a day for the next week, hoping for something that never came. 6 weeks later, her nausea started. The tests turned positive before she could even finish reading the instructions. She stared at the pink lines for an hour. There was no name to write on the birth certificate, no one to contact, no one to blame, only her. She cried in her car that night. Then she wiped her face, went back to work, and started saving everything she had. Talia never tried to find him. What would she search? Miles from Denver Hotel. She didn't even know his last name. So she stayed in Chicago, worked harder, took night shifts at the front desk, found an apartment just big enough for 2. She gave birth alone, and promised herself never to depend on someone who didn't ask to stay. But sometimes, in the quiet moments, when her son would laugh in his sleep, or when her mind wandered between exhaustion and dreams, she thought about that night, about the man who saw her, not as a receptionist, not as a tired girl in discount heels, but as a woman worth talking to. She didn't resent him, not really, because he gave her the greatest thing she never knew she needed. She named her son Luca, not after anyone, just a name she liked, a name that felt strong, a name that belonged to her child, hers alone. 2 years passed. Talia moved through them with quiet purpose. Her life was predictable. Routines, rent payments, morning cereal, daycare runs. The kind of life where peace came not from big moments, but small ones. She no longer looked for him, not in crowds, not in airports, not in passing conversations, until she saw his face on a billboard. She was crossing West Madison Avenue, balancing a paper bag of groceries, when she glanced up and froze. It was just an ad, an investment firm logo beneath his name, Carrington Sky Investments. Founder and CEO, Miles Carrington. Her hands tightened on the bag. She whispered the name once, as if testing it. Miles Carrington. It all made sense. The suit, the poise, the way he never said too much. He hadn't left his name because he didn't want to be found. Still, her fingers didn't reach for her phone. She didn't search his office address or company website. She just went home. Months later, she got a new job at a law firm. Steady hours, better benefits. A partner at the firm had pulled strings after overhearing her correct a legal doc at the front desk. He said, "You've got the mind for this. Let's put it to use." She didn't celebrate, just smiled politely and accepted the offer. New floor, new desk, new routine, until the quarterly client review meeting. She was sorting documents in the reception area when the elevator chimed. Another executive group visit, nothing new. She didn't even glance up at first, but when she did, her body went still. There he was, Miles Carrington, in a tailored navy suit, reading from his phone, flanked by 2 assistants. He didn't see her. Not at first, but then their eyes met. He paused mid-step, brows furrowed, phone forgotten. His eyes scanned her face, then her nameplate, Talia Monroe, then, down the hall, past her, to the small boy holding a toy car beside the break room door. Brown curls, almond skin, eyes, his eyes, Luca looked up curiously, unaware of the storm gathering around him. Miles didn't speak, didn't ask. He didn't need to. He knew. That afternoon, he requested a break in the meeting. Talia had stepped into the stairwell to breathe when she heard his voice behind her. "I wasn't expecting—" He started, then stopped. She didn't run. She didn't cry. She simply said, "Now you know." There was a silence between them. Not heavy, not angry, just real. "You never said your name," she added. "I didn't think it mattered." It didn't. Until it did. They stood in silence again. Not like strangers, not like lovers. Like two people carrying something neither of them had words for. "I don't want to cause trouble," he said. "I just want to talk." She nodded, slowly. "You can buy me coffee." "Just coffee," she added. His mouth lifted, barely. "Of course. Have you ever had to face the one person you never thought you'd see? Again, holding the truth you didn't know you were ready to share? Drop a comment below. And tell us, what would you do in Talia's shoes? Like this story so far? Don't forget to subscribe and share it with someone who believes in second chances. Miles Carrington sat in the glass-walled conference room with a file open before him, but his mind was far from the numbers printed on the page. His team was presenting quarterly summaries, projections, talking points, but all he could think about was her, Talia. Her name echoed in his thoughts like a song he couldn't turn off. It was her. It had been her that night in Denver. And now, 2 years later, she was sitting behind the front desk of a firm he had just signed a partnership deal with. Of all the law firms in Chicago, of all the buildings in this city, he had walked into hers. He remembered her voice, soft but steady, when she said, "You didn't leave your name." She hadn't been angry. She hadn't tried to guilt him. She had just said it like a fact, like she had carried that truth for a long time. And in the space between her words, Miles had felt the weight of what he'd left behind. She hadn't needed to say the boy was his. The resemblance was undeniable. The same dark eyes, the same shape of the jaw, even the way he stood, observant, quietly taking in the world around him. It was like looking at a younger version of himself. He didn't remember walking back into the room after that conversation, didn't remember finishing the meeting. He signed the papers, shook hands, smiled where he needed to, but his focus was gone. Lost. He needed air. The elevator doors closed behind him, and for the first time in years, he didn't have a destination. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, trying to piece together what this all meant. What it changed. It had to mean something. Meanwhile, Talia sat at her desk, her heart pounding so loud it nearly drowned out the hum of office phones and the click of heels against polished floors. She kept her eyes on the screen, pretending to read an email she had opened 3 times already. He was here. Not just here. He owned part of this firm. That meant he'd be around. Meetings, updates, maybe even more than that. She didn't know how often or how long, but the idea of seeing him again, regularly, shook her. She hated the way it made her feel. Like she was back in that hotel room, watching him sleep for the last time. Like she was 25 again, and foolish enough to believe one night could mean something. But more than that, she was terrified of what this meant for her son. Luca didn't know who his father was. He knew he didn't have one in the picture, but he'd never asked too many questions. Yet, Talia had built a world for him that felt safe, structured, steady. She wasn't ready to invite uncertainty into that world. She especially wasn't ready to explain why the man who looked just like him had vanished before he was even born. Later that afternoon, Miles requested another meeting, not with the legal team, but with her. Talia considered declining. She hovered over the email notification, her mouse shaking slightly. But deep down, she knew avoiding him wouldn't erase what had already surfaced. It would only delay the inevitable. So she replied, 5:30 p.m. Conference Room 6B, neutral ground. After hours, no distractions. When she walked into the room, Miles was already there, standing by the window. The city skyline stretched out behind him, glowing orange and pink as the sun began to dip. He turned as the door clicked shut. His eyes landed on her, steady and unreadable. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. She sat across from him, folding her hands in her lap. "I didn't come for pleasantries, Miles. Say what you need to say." There was a beat of silence. Then, too, "I didn't know," he said, "until I saw him. I swear to you, Talia, I didn't walk away from anything. I just didn't know it existed." She looked down at her hands. "I know. You didn't owe me anything. It was one night. No names, no promises. But it wasn't meaningless." She met his eyes again. "To you?" He nodded slowly. "Yes." Talia let out a slow breath. "It was real for me too. But after you left, I convinced myself it had to stay in the past. There was no way to find you. I didn't even know what city you lived in. I couldn't guess what company you ran. I didn't know you were this." She gestured loosely toward him, toward the suit, the company, the power. "I'm still that guy," he said. "The one you met. The one who couldn't stop listening to you that night. Maybe. But now, there's a child involved. I want to be part of his life," Miles said, his voice steady but not forceful. "I'm not asking to take over. I just want to start." Talia's eyes flicked toward the window. "You don't know him. You don't know anything about raising a child." "I don't," he admitted. "But I can learn. If you let me." The room felt heavy again, thick with everything they hadn't said. "I don't want your money," she said. "Let's get that clear." "I didn't offer it," he replied. "I'm saying it now so we don't play that game later." He nodded. "Understood." Another pause. "Start with visits," she said, slowly. "Short ones. Weekends. I'll stay nearby. He doesn't know you yet. He needs time. So do I." She looked at him again. His expression wasn't cold or arrogant. It was human. For the first time since that night, she saw the same version of him. The quiet one. The man who talked about the sky. "I have one condition," she said. "Name it. No press, no statements, no photos. I don't want him in the spotlight." Miles leaned back in his chair, exhaling like he had just been holding his breath since morning. "You have my word." For a long time, neither of them spoke. Talia rose from the chair. "I'll let you know when we're ready." He nodded. "Thank you." As she reached for the door, she hesitated. "Miles." He looked up. "If this is just about guilt or making peace with the past, don't bother." "It's not," he said, voice low. "This is about something I didn't realize I lost until today." That night, as she walked home through the city, Talia held Luca's tiny hand tighter. Her son skipped beside her, singing some made-up song about grapes and superheroes, unaware that his world had shifted. She wasn't sure how to feel. Hopeful, angry, nervous, maybe all three, but something in her chest felt lighter, not safe, not yet, just possible. Miles didn't go back to his hotel after the meeting with Talia. Instead, he walked. For almost an hour. No driver, no suit jacket, no direction. He moved past corner cafes and street musicians, past the rising scent of roasted peanuts and car exhaust. None of it mattered. His mind kept going back to her voice. Her face, the steadiness in her eyes when she said, "If this is just about guilt or making peace with the past, don't bother." She had every right to say it, and he hadn't flinched because he knew she was right. He had everything he thought he wanted, his name in financial magazines, a company, portfolio worth 9 figures, full control of every room he entered. And yet the second he saw that boy, it all shifted. Not because Luca existed, but because that child's mother still saw him as a man, not a billionaire, not a walking opportunity, just Miles. She remembered who he was when he was most honest, and that wrecked him. The next day, he was back at the firm for follow-up meetings. This time, his team was prepared. Polished presentations, confident summaries, smiling faces. Miles sat through it all like a ghost with perfect posture. He noticed every time Talia passed the glass wall of the boardroom. She didn't look in, didn't slow down. Just moved through the office like she had for the last 2 years. Quiet, competent, forgettable to everyone else. But now he couldn't unsee her. Didn't want to. Later, after the meeting wrapped, he left the room before his associates could stop him. He stepped out into the hallway and waited. Talia turned the corner, holding a notepad. She froze the second she saw him. "Do you have a second?" he asked. She looked behind her, then back at him. "Now, please." He didn't wait for her reply. He walked to the corner lounge, a semi-private space with 2 chairs and a small table. She followed, hesitant but curious. When they sat down, Miles didn't speak immediately. She didn't push him. Finally, he said, "I spent my entire life avoiding chaos. I thought if I worked hard enough, earned enough, I could stay in control, that nothing could surprise me." Talia watched him closely. He continued, "I've built entire systems just to keep life clean, safe, predictable. And then?" she asked. He met her eyes. "Then I saw your son." The word "your" wasn't an accident. Talia tilted her head slightly. "What did you see?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I saw myself, but better, softer. I saw what I've never made time for." The words hung between them. Talia crossed her legs, folding her hands over her knee. "You don't have to say the right thing, Miles. There's no script, no deal to close. This isn't business." "I know. That's why I'm sitting here." She inhaled. "So, what do you want?" "I want to be useful," he said. "Even if it's just a 10-minute visit on a Saturday. I'm not here to take over your life. But I also can't ignore that I walked out of a hotel room and left something behind I didn't know existed." Talia didn't look away. "I protected him from that possibility. From being unwanted." Miles's jaw clenched. "He's not unwanted. You didn't even leave your name, Miles. I thought it would make things easier." "For who?" Silence. She shook her head, not out of anger, but disappointment. "I don't hate you," she said. "But I don't know you, and I don't know if I want you around him just yet." He nodded slowly. "Then let me earn it." A few days later, she sent a message. Simple, clear. Saturday, 11 a.m., Hamilton Park. Bring nothing but time. Miles stared at the text for longer than necessary. He didn't reply right away. He knew what this meant. It wasn't just about a park visit. It was a test. Not to impress her, not to impress the boy, but to prove to himself that he could show up and not run. When Saturday came, he dressed simply. No watch, no tailored jacket, no cologne. He didn't want to look like a businessman. He wanted to look like someone who knew how to sit still. He arrived early, parked quietly at the far end, and walked to the open area near the benches. Talia was already there. She stood by a swing set, arms crossed, her eyes scanning the open field. She looked calm, but not relaxed. She held herself with the tension of someone who had learned to expect abandonment. He didn't bring flowers, or a toy, or anything that screamed, "I'm trying too hard." Just himself. When she saw him, she gave a small nod. "Hey," he said. "Hey." He looked around. "Where is he?" "Home," she replied. "With my mother." Miles blinked. "You didn't bring him?" "No," she said. "I brought you here to see if you'd actually show up." He let out a breath. "You don't trust me." "I don't know you," she corrected. "There's a difference." He nodded. "Fair." She sat on the bench and gestured for him to do the same. "I don't make emotional decisions anymore, Miles. I have a child. My first priority is keeping him stable." "I understand." She turned her head. "Do you?" "I think I'm starting to." They sat in silence again. This time, it didn't feel heavy, just real. Talia finally said, "I've been alone in this since the beginning, not bitter, just alone. If you want to be part of this, you're going to have to accept that it's on our terms, mine and his." "I want that." "Why?" He looked at her. "Because I don't want to be the kind of man who walks away and keeps pretending nothing's missing." That evening, as Talia walked home, she didn't feel resolved, but she felt seen. She didn't know where this would go. But something told her that this time he wouldn't disappear. And that, for now, was enough. Talia sat at her kitchen table, elbows resting on a wrinkled placemat, the apartment quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. A cup of tea sat untouched in front of her, already cooling. Her mother had taken Luca to the library, giving her space she hadn't asked for, but clearly needed. She replayed the park moment in her mind. Miles had shown up, not dressed to impress, not trying to take control, just there, present, listening, respectful of boundaries. And in this world, that meant more than grand gestures. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't dramatic. It was intentional. She had half expected him not to come, or to come late, or to show up with something flashy in hand, trying to compensate. But he didn't. He came like a man who was finally willing to sit in discomfort. And that was new. That night, she opened the drawer in her nightstand. Tucked inside were old journals, a few worn letters, a stack of appointment cards from Luca's early days, and a single photograph, one she took of herself during her pregnancy. She looked tired, makeup-free, swollen in the face, but peaceful. She had gone through every stage of that journey alone, and now the person connected to that night stood at the edge of her world again, asking to be let in. Was she ready? She wasn't sure, but something told her she didn't have to be. She just had to start. Across the city, Miles sat in his penthouse apartment, still dressed in the jeans and black polo from earlier that day. The skyline stretched behind him, all glass and ambition, but his eyes weren't drawn to it. Instead, they were fixed on a small notepad on the table before him. He hadn't written anything in years, not outside of contracts or keynote outlines, but tonight he picked up a pen and scribbled a line across the top of the page. "You didn't leave your name." It echoed in his head like a challenge. It had sounded so simple when she said it, but beneath it was a flood of consequences. She hadn't said it to blame him. She said it as if she had repeated those words 100 times to herself over 2 years. Each time her child asked an innocent question that she didn't know how to answer. Miles leaned back and closed his eyes. He had walked away from something real, not out of cruelty, but out of habit. He was used to leaving early, used to never unpacking emotions, used to disappearing before things got too close. But now he couldn't stop thinking about what life looked like if he stayed. A week passed. Talia didn't reach out. She didn't owe him anything, and he knew that. But it didn't stop him from checking his phone more often than usual. He didn't call her, didn't push, but he wanted to. He also knew better than to rush someone who had lived through 2 years of silence. So he waited. And then, late Thursday evening, a message came through. Sunday, 10 a.m., Garfield Park. Don't be late. No signature, no emoji. Just like her, direct, clear, and steady. Miles smiled, not because he had earned anything, but because he was being trusted with the next step. He set the phone down and stood from the couch. He wasn't sure what kind of father he'd be. He wasn't sure if Talia would ever let him into her heart again. But for once, uncertainty didn't terrify him, because for the first time in years, he wasn't running. Sunday morning came with a cool breeze and overcast skies. Garfield Park was quieter than usual, still too early for the lunch crowd and far too cool for anyone hoping to sunbathe. It was perfect, quiet enough for nerves to be heard, still enough for moments to settle. Miles arrived 10 minutes early. He didn't bring anything this time either. No gifts, no props, just himself in dark jeans and a soft grey sweater. He stood by the low stone wall near the walking path, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the horizon. When Talia appeared, she was holding Luca's hand, but he was barely noticeable in the moment. Miles's attention went straight to her. She wore a long tan coat and black boots. Her hair was pulled back into a low bun, and she looked calm, not relaxed, not glowing, but grounded, steady, like a woman who had learned to carry herself through storms. Miles had seen powerful people his entire life. None of them had the quiet strength she carried. Luca stayed close to her as they approached. still unsure of this man who had entered his mother's life with no warning. Talia had prepared him, of course, but only lightly. "This is Miles," she had told him. "Someone who knew me a long time ago. No big introductions, no declarations." When they reached him, she gave a small nod. "You're early," she said. "I didn't want to waste a second." Luca peeked from behind her leg. Miles crouched down, not too close, not pushing. "Hi," he said, voice even. "I'm Miles. It's good to meet you." Luca blinked up at him but said nothing. Talia placed her hand gently on her son's shoulder. "You can say hi if you want." The boy nodded slightly but still stayed silent. Miles didn't push. He just smiled and stood again. "I brought snacks," Talia said, holding up a small cloth tote. "I figured we could walk." "There's a bench near the pond. Lead the way," Miles said. The walk was quiet at first. Luca skipped ahead a little, occasionally stopping to pick up a stick or kick a stray leaf. Talia walked beside Miles but left space between them. Enough to breathe, enough to stay separate. "I wasn't sure you'd text again," he said. "I wasn't sure I should. And now? I still don't know." He looked at her, but she didn't return the glance. "Fair," he said quietly. They reached the bench. Luca climbed onto it and began pulling small crackers from a container. Talia handed him a juice pouch. Miles stood nearby, hands loose at his sides. "You don't need to prove anything," she said suddenly. "I'm not here to—" "You're trying, though." "I want to do this right. Do you even know what that means?" Miles looked out over the water. "No. But I'm willing to figure it out." Talia watched him, not as a man she had once slept with, not as a CEO, but as a man who was slowly, visibly, shifting his life around a truth he never saw coming. She respected that. But trust wasn't given in 3 park visits and soft words. So she stayed quiet. "I'll admit something," he said, voice low. She raised an eyebrow. "I've been thinking about you, not just now, for a long time." She didn't respond. That night in Denver, it never left me. Still, she said nothing. Miles let out a slow breath. "You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know." "I know," she finally said. They stood in silence again. Luca wandered back toward them with a leaf in his hand. Talia knelt beside him and examined it with interest. "Looks like it's turning. Fall's coming early." The boy nodded. Miles watched her with her son, calm, present, gentle, and he knew in that moment she didn't need him. She had built a full life without him, which made him want to be part of it even more, because she wasn't asking for rescue. She was giving him a chance, and those were harder to earn. Later, as they left the park and returned to the lot, Talia paused at the passenger door. "Same time next week?" she asked. Miles nodded. "Same time." She opened the door, buckled Luca in, then turned back. "But don't think this means anything more than what it is," she added. "I'm letting you get to know your son. That's it." "I understand." She hesitated for half a second before getting in. Miles stood there until the car pulled away, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel dismissed. He felt invited, even if it was only a sliver. The 4th Sunday visit felt different. The park routine had grown familiar. Luca knew the way. Miles knew when to speak and when to hold back. And Talia had stopped watching him like he might disappear. Not completely, but enough. They had started to fall into something, not a rhythm, but a cautious pull, as if both were standing on opposite ends of a rope, holding just tightly enough to feel each other's weight. That morning, the weather had turned. Summer was fading, and Chicago air had taken on its early fall crispness. Talia wore a soft burgundy sweater and dark jeans. Miles noticed that her hair was down this time. He said nothing about it, but he noticed. Luca ran ahead to the small pond, obsessed with the ducks. Talia and Miles walked behind, not speaking for several minutes. "I'm surprised," she said eventually. "By what?" "That you keep showing up." He glanced at her. "Did you think I wouldn't?" She shrugged. "People disappear all the time, especially men with too much power and not enough accountability." Miles didn't argue. He couldn't. He had been that man, Once. I almost didn't come that first time, she added. I wouldn't have blamed you. But you came, she said, looking up at him now. And every week since. He smiled faintly. That's how trust works, right? Talia didn't smile, but her expression softened. They walked quietly until Luca turned back and waved a crumpled sandwich bag. The ducks are ignoring me. Talia laughed. They're not ignoring you, baby. They're just full. She walked over to him, crouched, and started pointing at the reeds. Miles stood back and watched. The way she explained the world to her son was nothing short of remarkable. She didn't talk down to him. She spoke with patience and wonder, as if every small discovery deserved its own applause. And then she looked up and caught him staring. What? She asked. Nothing. She stood, dusted her knees. You're doing it again. What? Looking at me like I'm some surprise. You are. She blinked at that. There was a long pause. Miles took a step closer. Can I take you to dinner? Her eyes narrowed, surprised. Dinner? Not a date, he added quickly. Just time. Outside of parks and juice boxes. I don't need anything more than what we're already doing, Miles. I know. But I'm asking. She looked past him, toward the water, as if considering the risks stacked against the idea. Finally, she said, one dinner, public place, no expectations. Of course. They chose a quiet Italian spot near her neighborhood. Not fancy, not cheap, just normal. When Miles arrived, she was already seated at a booth near the back. Candlelight flickered between them, casting shadows that made her features softer. She wore a dark blouse and minimal makeup. He couldn't stop looking at her. You're overdressed, she said as he sat. He glanced down at his charcoal blazer. Force of habit. She smirked. You probably wear cufflinks to bed. He laughed. Only on weekends. She blinked, then let out a soft chuckle. A real one. He hadn't heard that sound since Denver. The waiter came. They ordered. Nothing extravagant. Pasta, wine, water. Conversation began slowly, then flowed. They talked about books, childhood memories, how she used to dream of becoming a photojournalist, how he had once wanted to be a musician but never learned anything past 2 chords on a guitar. It was easy, natural, and when the bill came, she didn't reach for it. She just let him take it. Not because she expected him to, but because she was finally letting herself be in the moment. As they stepped outside, a cool wind swept past. I'll walk you to your car, he offered. She didn't protest. They moved side by side, slow, quiet. The street wasn't crowded, but the city still buzzed faintly around them. When they reached her car, she turned toward him. Thank you, she said softly, for not trying too hard. He smiled. I'm trying just enough. She leaned back against the door. You're different now. So are you. He took a step closer. Not enough to close the space, but enough to feel it. There was a pause, long enough for tension to rise, short enough for restraint to still win. His eyes flicked to her lips, then back to her eyes. She didn't move. Neither did he. Almost, but not yet. Not tonight. Talia placed a hand gently on his chest. Don't. I wasn't going to. Yes, you were. He chuckled under his breath. Okay. Maybe I was. She didn't drop her hand right away. I'm not ready, she whispered. I'm not asking you to be. And still, neither of them stepped back. The moment broke when a car honked in the distance. She smiled first. A real one. He stepped back. Good night, Talia. Good night, Miles. He watched her drive off, his heart pounding slower than before, but heavier than it had in years. Almost a kiss, but just enough to know they were getting closer. The following week passed quietly. Neither of them reached out, not for a second park visit, not for small talk, not even for a thank you text after dinner. But it wasn't avoidance. It wasn't regret. It was space. And for the first time in a long time, Miles respected space without needing to fill it. He sat with his thoughts, walked through his office without distraction, and even turned down a weekend investor retreat. His assistant blinked at him when he declined. "You're skipping Aspen?" she asked, stunned. "Yeah," he said, not in the mood for snow or fake smiles. "Since when?" "Since now." He knew what he wanted, or at least what he wanted to protect. Talia, not as a trophy, not as a second chance to fix his image, as a woman who had raised a child with grace and strength, as someone who never asked for anything but deserved everything he hadn't given. He didn't want to buy her time or prove his value. He wanted to earn her trust. Talia, on the other hand, spent the week wondering if she had misread everything. Miles hadn't called, not once, and though she had asked for boundaries, part of her, a small hidden part, had expected him to slip, to break silence just to say, "I'm thinking of you," but he didn't. She told herself that was good, that it meant he respected her pace, that he wasn't chasing the convenience of another emotional shortcut. Still, she felt the echo of that almost kiss every night before bed, the way he looked at her, the way her hand rested on his chest longer than it should have, the way his eyes had said things his mouth didn't dare form. She had told herself that no man could hold both power and patience. And yet, here he was, doing both. "Saturday morning," he texted. "Lunch today? Just you and me. I'll come to you. No pressure." She stared at the message for several minutes before replying. 12:30. Black Oak Cafe. "Come early. I hate waiting." The cafe was warm, tucked into a quiet street lined with small shops and flower stalls. It wasn't a place where people wore suits or discussed quarterly earnings. It was a place for regular people with paper menus and tea served in chipped mugs. Miles arrived 10 minutes early. She was already there, sitting by the window, one hand wrapped around a mug, the other flipping through a paperback. He smiled when he saw her. Not big, just enough to feel it. "I expected you to cancel," she said as he sat. "I almost did." She raised an eyebrow. "But then, I remembered something," he continued. "You told me that day at the park you didn't need anything from me, just truth." She nodded. "Well, here's mine. I didn't leave you my name that night because I didn't want anything complicated, not because I didn't care, but because I was selfish. I thought life was easier that way." "It probably was," she replied. "For a while, yeah." Their eyes met across the table. There was no fire in her stare. Just calm, sharp clarity. "I can't rewrite what happened," he said. "But I can be better from this point forward." Talia took a sip of her tea, watching him. "I believe that," she said. He blinked. "You do? I believe you're trying, but I don't trust you yet. I don't expect you to. I don't know if I ever will." He nodded slowly. "And the truth is," she added, "I don't want another man who thinks an apology and a few nice dinners are enough to earn a place in my life. I know. I want someone who's willing to start at zero and stay at zero until I say otherwise." Miles leaned forward, folding his hands on the table. "Then that's where I'll start," he said. "At zero." She looked at him for a long moment. "You're saying all the right things. I'm not trying to impress you." "Good." Pause. "Because if you were," she added, "you would have already failed." He laughed softly. "That's fair." They left the cafe together. This time, he didn't offer to walk her to her car. And she didn't ask. They just stood outside the door, watching people pass. "You know," she said, "this doesn't mean I'm ready to let you all the way in." "I don't want all the way in." She raised a brow again. "I want whatever you give me," he said. "I want to earn it." A quiet passed between them. Then, finally, she offered something she hadn't before her hand. Not romantic, not flirtatious, just a gesture of permission. He took it, and for a brief second, they just stood there, two people learning how to begin again, without shortcuts. The next week came with meetings, strategy calls, and paperwork. On the surface, Miles was back to routine. His team didn't notice anything different. He was still sharp in negotiations, focused during pitches, and quick to spot weak numbers in a budget sheet. But under that composure, something had shifted. He wasn't rushing to close deals or pack his calendar anymore. Instead of late nights at the office, he made time for long drives. Instead of back lunches with investors, he declined politely and thought about Talia. He didn't tell her that, didn't try to overstep, but she was in his mind more than he expected. And not just because of their history, but because of how she didn't chase him, how she never asked for anything, how she still hadn't said what he was hoping to hear. He respected that. It grounded him. But that peace didn't last long, because Ariella Grant was back in town. They had met 6 years ago during a board fundraiser in Los Angeles. Ariella was smart, connected, and striking in a way that turned heads. She was the kind of woman who made entrances on purpose and never stayed in rooms she couldn't control. They had dated briefly. Miles was drawn to her edge, but once she realized he couldn't be molded into a PR darling, she moved on. Their lives diverged, different cities, different investments, but she always hovered near the surface, appearing whenever she needed something. And she always needed something. So when Miles got the message from his assistant, Ariella Grant requested a private meeting. She's in Chicago. Your calendar's clear tomorrow morning. Want me to decline? He stared at the screen a moment too long before replying, No, I'll handle it. The next day, Ariella walked into the Carrington Sky building like she owned half of it. Tall, polished, dressed in a navy power suit and gold heels that clicked in rhythm with her ambition. She smiled when she saw him in the private conference room. Miles, she purred. Still allergic to small talk? He didn't stand. Depends on the company. She sat across from him, crossing one leg over the other. I've missed this dry sarcasm. He folded his hands on the table. Cut to it, Ariella. Her smile widened. Fine. Straight to the point. I'm launching a fund. Real estate meets digital equity. I need 2 high-profile names to anchor the announcement. You're one of them. I'm not interested. You haven't heard the pitch yet. I don't need to. She tilted her head, watching him. You're different, she said. Grounded. I can't decide if that makes you more appealing or more dangerous. He didn't react. She leaned forward slightly. Is it the woman? Miles blinked once. Ariella's tone sharpened. Talia Monroe. The room chilled. I saw her, she added casually. Heard about the child. The whispers. You've been quiet, Miles. That's not like you. He kept his voice level. Whatever you think you know, leave it there. Oh, please. You're a billionaire. You don't get the luxury of privacy anymore. He stood. This meeting is over, but she didn't move. Look, she said more seriously. I don't care what mess you've stepped into. I care about the headlines. You attach your name to my fund. I keep that story buried. Your image stays clean. Everyone wins. He stared at her. Long, cold, silent. Then he spoke. I don't trade people for peace, Ariella. And I sure as hell don't protect my brand at the cost of someone else's life. She stood, smoothing her skirt. You're slipping, Miles. Be careful who you fall for. That night, he didn't text Talia. He needed time to think, not because Ariella had power over him. She didn't. But because the past never stayed buried forever, and she had just made it clear his world and Talia's weren't separate anymore. They were bleeding into each other, and someone would get hurt if he didn't act right. Talia didn't hear from Miles for 2 days. No texts, no calls, no check-ins. It didn't alarm her, not at first. They weren't a couple. There were no promises between them. He had made it clear he wanted to show up for her and for the boy, but he hadn't asked for more. Still, something felt off. On Monday, she passed by the break room and caught a glimpse of 2 associates from her firm whispering over their phones, the way people do when something juicy has dropped, but they're pretending it's not a big deal. She walked past, kept moving, until one of them, a paralegal named Nora, called out to her. Hey, Talia, you didn't hear this from me, okay? Talia turned slowly. Hear what? Nora lowered her voice. Miles Carrington was in a private meeting last week with Ariella Grant. Talia blinked. I don't know who that is. She's a venture capitalist. Big mouth, bigger attitude. She's the type who knows how to spin a headline, and she's telling people she's about to close a deal with him. Talia's throat tightened. Nora continued, "You're close to him, right? She's been dropping your name. Said she knows about you and the kid." Talia felt her spine stiffen. "Thanks for telling me," she said, and walked away before Nora could finish. That night, Talia didn't sleep. Not well. The past 2 years had trained her to expect betrayal early, to read between words, to listen for shifts in tone, to sense the unraveling before it happened. So when she sat on her couch at midnight, staring at a text she never sent, her mind did what it always did, built the worst-case scenario. What if Miles had made a deal behind her back? What if all of this, the walks in the park, the dinners, the calm, was just an elaborate softening before the blow? She didn't want to think that way. But the woman whispering about headlines and the boy didn't make it easy. The next morning, she showed up at work early. She didn't look for Miles, didn't walk near the upper-floor conference rooms. She took her seat at the front desk, focused on her computer, and waited. At 10:03 a.m., Miles walked through the lobby. He didn't notice her at first. He looked tired, not sharp, worn. But when he glanced toward the desk and saw her eyes on him, he stopped. She didn't smile, didn't wave. She just said, "I heard about your meeting." Miles exhaled slowly. "Let's not do this here." Her voice remained even. "Did you take her deal?" "No." "Did you let her use my name to protect your image?" "No." "She says otherwise." "I don't care what she says. I shut it down." She stood now, stepping out from behind the desk. "Then why didn't you tell me it happened?" He looked at her, not with guilt, but with quiet frustration. "Because I didn't want to bring her into this. You deserve peace. I didn't want to muddy that. You didn't want to be honest. I didn't want to make you carry something I could handle myself. You don't get to protect me from my own life, Miles." Silence. A few nearby staff members glanced over, sensing the tension but not quite hearing the words. Talia stepped back behind the desk. "I asked you for one thing," she said. "Clarity. You said you'd start from zero. This isn't zero. This is omission." Miles nodded. "I know." She turned her eyes back to her screen. He didn't linger, and that, somehow, stung more than if he had stayed. Later that evening, she opened her phone and reread their old texts. She didn't cry, didn't get angry, just read them like chapters from a story that was starting to lose direction. She locked the phone, sat back, took a breath, and whispered to herself, "He's not him." But that didn't mean he wouldn't become him again. Miles sat alone that night, lights off in his living room, city lights reflecting against the windows. He knew he had messed up, not because he had done something, but because he had hidden something. And for someone like Talia, that was enough. She had survived years of silence, years of being left out. He should have known that not telling would feel like history repeating itself. But he hadn't acted out of malice. He had acted out of habit. He'd spent his life keeping noise away from what mattered, controlling optics, managing crisis. But Talia wasn't a brand. She wasn't a risk to mitigate. She was a woman who had asked for one thing, the truth. And he had missed the chance to offer it before someone else weaponized it. Talia didn't go to work the next day. She texted her manager that morning, "Won't be in, need a personal day." Then turned off her phone, not because she didn't want to talk to Miles, but because she knew if he reached out, she might answer. And she wasn't sure what she'd say. It wasn't just about Ariella. It wasn't even about the deal. It was the fact that Talia had started to believe again. In him, in them, in the idea that maybe a man who left her in the dark once could walk back into her life with a flashlight and not a script. But now, the shadows were back, and once they returned, they were hard to ignore. Miles waited outside the firm's building that morning. He sat in his car, parked 2 blocks down, watching the glass doors. But she never came in. Not by 8, not by 9, not by 10. He didn't go inside, didn't want to corner her at her desk or force a scene. But by 11:30, he knew she was gone. He picked up his phone, started a message, then deleted it. Started another, deleted that too. Nothing sounded right. Nothing felt like enough. So instead, he drove, not to his office, not to a lunch meeting. He drove to the address she once casually mentioned, her mother's apartment. She had said it weeks ago during one of their walks, almost like a throwaway comment. My mom lives off Pulaski. Brownstone. Faded mailbox. He remembered. He always remembered when it came to her. When she opened the door, Talia wasn't surprised to see him. But she wasn't happy either. Her expression was unreadable. Guarded. Miles. I need to talk. She opened the door wider, but didn't step aside. My mother's not here. I didn't come for her. I didn't ask you to come at all. He didn't move. I'm not leaving without saying what I need to say. She hesitated, then stepped aside, wordlessly letting him in. The apartment was small, warm, and lived in. Family photos lined the hallway. A worn quilt hung over the back of the couch. A few books were stacked on the coffee table, mostly children's stories and cookbooks. He took it all in quietly. She remained standing. I'm listening, she said. He looked at her, eyes tired, voice calm. I should have told you about the meeting. I should have come to you before Ariella had a chance to twist it. Yes, she said, flat. But I didn't, because I was trying to protect you from something ugly, something old, something that doesn't belong in your world. You don't get to decide what belongs in my world. I know. You think I haven't had enough ugly already? He flinched. Talia stepped forward. When you left me in that hotel room, I woke up thinking I'd imagined it all. I told myself it was one night, no promises, no ties. But when I found out I was pregnant, I had to rewrite everything. Alone. I didn't know. I'm not blaming you for that. Not anymore, she cut in. But don't come into my life asking to build something real and then hide parts of it like I'm too delicate to handle the truth. I was scared. Of what? Of losing the version of me you started to trust. She looked at him now. Finally looked. Fully. That version of you doesn't exist if he's hiding behind boardrooms and press releases. He nodded once. Quiet. Humble. Hurt. I know. A pause. Long. Quiet. Breathless. You're good at walking away, Miles. I'm trying not to be. Then stop giving me reasons to expect it. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She just walked to the door and opened it again. Miles looked at her. Are you asking me to leave? I'm asking you to give me time. Alone. No park visits, no cafe lunches, just time. He stepped forward. Talia. She shook her head. This isn't a break. It's a boundary. I understand. Do you? Yes. He looked at her one more time, as if memorizing something he wasn't sure he'd get back. Then he stepped outside, and she closed the door, gently, not slamming, not locking, just closing, softly, but firmly. Miles Carrington sat in silence inside his apartment. The penthouse floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the entire Chicago skyline, glittering and proud. His name was on buildings, in news tickers, on deal documents flying across 5 cities. But none of that power, none of those assets, could fix what he had just broken. Not this time. He had always been able to fix problems with money, connections, or leverage. That was how his world worked. You didn't feel your mistakes. You corrected them. Quickly, quietly, profitably. But this wasn't business. This was her. And her silence hurt more than any boardroom betrayal ever had. He tried to keep himself busy that Monday, tried to review quarterly performance reports, tried to attend his CFO's strategy presentation. He couldn't focus. He cancelled 2 calls, postponed a meeting with an international client, and stared at the same document for 45 minutes without reading a word. When his assistant poked her head in and asked, "Are you all right?" he simply nodded and lied. But he wasn't, because he had never actually learned how to sit with regret. He had only ever learned how to avoid it. By Wednesday he left the office early. No driver, no staff, no assistant, just him and a quiet car ride westbound. He didn't call Talia. He didn't even plan to see her. But he knew exactly where he was going. The neighborhood hadn't changed much. Small houses, faded porches, the same cracked pavement and rusty gates. It was the street where his mother had raised him after his father walked out and never came back. The street that had made him sharp, careful, determined to never be left behind again. He parked in front of the old house, still standing, barely. The windows were yellowed. The roof was sagging slightly. The front steps had a loose board he remembered tripping over as a kid. It all looked smaller now, but the ache was the same. He didn't go inside. He just stood there, hands in his coat pockets, staring at what built him. And suddenly he understood why Talia's voice hurt so much when she said, "You're good at walking away." Because he had learned that here. You walk away before they do. You hide the truth because showing it gets you punished. You protect people by keeping them out, not by letting them in. That had been his survival instinct. But now, it was the very thing keeping him from the only woman who had ever seen him clearly. An older neighbor, Mrs. Lowe, stepped onto her porch next door and squinted. "Miles Carrington. That you?" He turned. "Yes, ma'am." "Well, I'll be," she said. "Didn't think I'd see you back here. Not after the world started calling your name." He smiled weakly. "Just passing through." She studied him. "You look tired." "I've had a rough week." She chuckled. "You always did carry the world on your shoulders like it owed you something." "Even when you were 10, he laughed lightly, still trying to break that habit. "Well," she said, stepping back inside, "if the world ever gets too loud, come sit on this porch again. Some of us still remember you when you were just Miles. No title, no cameras." He nodded. That's what he needed. To remember who he was before the world told him who to become. He didn't drive home immediately. He stopped at a small corner diner 5 blocks down. Ordered coffee. No laptop, no phone, just him and a black ceramic mug on a scratched table. The server, a teenage girl with chipped nails and a fake ID tucked in her apron, didn't recognize him. It was perfect. He stayed for almost 2 hours, writing on the back of an old receipt. Not a speech, not an apology, just thoughts, sentences he'd never let himself say out loud. "I never learned how to stay. I thought control was love. I want to be better. But I don't know what that looks like without you in the room." He folded the paper and kept it in his jacket. He didn't know when or if he'd show it to her. But it was the first time he let himself admit it. Not to the world. To himself. Talia didn't expect the envelope. It arrived Friday evening, hand-delivered by the building's doorman. No courier, no branding. Just her name on the front, written in steady, familiar handwriting. She turned it over once, then again, debating whether to open it. She hadn't heard from Miles since that last conversation. No texts, no visits. He had respected her boundary, and somehow that made it harder, because part of her had expected him to push, to force a fix, to make grand gestures. But instead, he had gone silent. Not to disappear, but to listen. And now, this. She finally opened the envelope. Inside was a short letter, not typed, not rehearsed, just pen on paper. "Talia, you said I don't get to protect you from your own life. And you were right. So instead of trying to fix what I broke, I want you to see where I came from. Not the boardrooms, not the press photos, just the truth. If you're willing to meet me tomorrow, I'll be there. No expectations, no ask. Just me, at the beginning." Miles. The next morning, she found herself in a rideshare headed west, outside the polished streets she was used to. The driver pulled up to a corner in a quiet neighborhood that paused in time. Brick homes, iron gates, sidewalks cracked from too many winters. And on the front step of one faded brownstone, Miles stood waiting. No suit, no expensive coat. Just jeans, sneakers, and a hoodie pulled low against the breeze. He looked different, not younger, not older. Just lighter. He opened the gate as she stepped out. "You came. I'm still deciding if I should have." He gave a soft nod. "Fair." She followed him up the steps and inside. The door creaked. The interior was stripped down, no furniture, no distractions, just an old dining table, a dusty bookshelf, and the faint smell of wood and thyme. "This was home?" she asked. He nodded. "From age 7 to 19. She turned slowly, absorbing the space. "It's smaller than I imagined. It was even smaller when we had 3 people living here and no heat in January." He motioned toward a back corner. "That's where my bed used to be. Fold-out mattress. No door. My mom did what she could. My dad left early, somewhere between his pride and his promises. Talia didn't speak. She didn't need to." Miles kept walking, past a chipped wall and a faded photo nailed crooked above a light switch. "She worked 3 jobs, had 1 coat, always pretended she wasn't cold. She taught me how to sign my name before I ever learned how to tie my shoes." His voice wasn't bitter. It was remembering. Talia followed him into the narrow kitchen. "My first pitch deck was sketched right here," he said, pointing to the counter. "I had no laptop, just a Sharpie and borrowed Wi-Fi from the laundromat down the street." She turned to him. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because I want you to know that everything you think I am came from this. And everything I'm still becoming," he paused, "has to be rooted in truth. No more polished versions, no more PR smiles." She studied his face. "You think I need to see your past to believe in your present?" "No," he said quietly. "I need to show you mine, because it's the only way I know how to start being real." They stood in the still kitchen, surrounded by shadows of his childhood. Talia's voice softened. "Why now?" "Because this, us, it's the first thing I haven't wanted to control, and that terrifies me." She leaned back against the counter. "You're still guarded." "I'm learning," he said. "Not how to be perfect, just how to stop hiding." She crossed her arms, gaze fixed on the floor. "You could have told me this at any point." "I know." "Why didn't you?" "Because I didn't want you to pity me, and I didn't want to use pain as currency." Her eyes lifted to his. He took a step closer. "I just want you to see me. Not the CEO, not the name, just me." Talia stayed silent. But this time, not from anger, not from fear, from recognition. For the first time, she saw him not as the man who left that night, but as the boy who learned to leave before anyone else could. And something inside her cracked. Not open, just enough to breathe. They didn't leave the house right away. After the conversation faded, Miles made tea in the old kettle he found tucked behind a dusty cabinet door. It still worked, surprisingly. The water took a while to heat, and they sat on mismatched stools in the small kitchen while the metal hummed. Talia didn't ask more questions. She didn't need to. Everything she needed to know wasn't in the words. It was in how he stood in that home without flinching. How he pointed out the broken light switch he used to fix with tape. How his voice didn't crack when he mentioned his mother, but his eyes told the truth. He wasn't sharing pain to earn sympathy. He was offering history to earn trust. When the kettle finally whistled, he poured into 2 chipped mugs he found in a crate near the floor. They were mismatched too. He handed her one. She took it with a nod. "Thanks." They sat quietly again, facing each other across the narrow space. Steam curled between them, softening the silence. "Do you come here often?" she asked eventually. "No. Not until last week." "What changed?" He looked down. "You told me to stop hiding. And this is you listening?" "This is me trying." She sipped slowly, keeping her eyes on him. He wasn't pushing, not asking to be forgiven, just showing up and letting her decide what came next. Talia set her mug down gently. "I've been alone for a long time, Miles. I know. And not just physically. I mean, emotionally. I don't let people in. Not easily. I see that, and the people I did let in eventually made me feel like that was a mistake." He nodded. "I've done the same. But from the other side." She folded her arms over her chest, not in defense, but as if holding something in place. "I don't want to keep building walls," she said quietly. "But I also don't want to hand my peace to someone who hasn't learned how to hold it." That line landed between them. heavy, real. Miles leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "I'm not asking for your peace, Talia," he said. "I'm asking if you'll let me walk beside it." She looked at him. He wasn't afraid of her silence anymore. He wasn't filling it with promises or poetic lines. He was just there, present, still. After a moment, she reached out, slowly, and placed her hand over his. Not dramatic, not romantic, just intentional. He didn't react with surprise. He didn't grip her tighter. He simply turned his palm to meet hers, gentle, warm, steady. They sat like that for a while. No titles, no pressure. Just fingers pressed together in a quiet agreement. Let's try. Outside, the wind picked up, tossing leaves across the sidewalk. Inside, two people sat in a childhood kitchen, holding hands. And for the first time since Denver, neither of them needed to speak to understand the other. Talia moved through her apartment like she was holding her breath. The kettle boiled. She turned it off. Forgot to pour the water. She reached for her keys, then stood there, holding them in her palm like a question she couldn't answer. It had been 3 days since that moment in the old house. 3 days since she sat in that kitchen, her hand resting in his, finally believing that maybe, he wasn't going to vanish again. But everything changed when the whispers started. A colleague texted her a screenshot from a gossip blog, small, local, but cruel. A blurry photo of her and Miles at the cafe weeks ago. A second shot from the law firm entrance. The headline read, "CEO Carrington's secret family? Sources claim he's been hiding a relationship with a former receptionist. Child involved. No facts, no names. But it didn't have to be detailed. Everyone in her office would know. Her neighborhood would know. And eventually, Luca would know. She didn't call Miles, didn't give him the chance to explain. Not because she blamed him, but because this was always the risk. Opening her life to someone whose name carried weight meant hers would be dragged behind it. She didn't cry. She packed. Not everything. Just what she and Luca needed for a few days. Clothes, essentials, her laptop, his favorite bedtime book. She told herself it was temporary. Just enough time to clear the air. Let the noise die down. She wasn't leaving him. She was protecting herself from the version of him that still lived in the headlines. Her mother didn't ask questions when she showed up. Just opened the door and stepped aside. Luca ran straight to the living room and climbed onto the couch, kicking off his shoes like it was his favorite place in the world. It probably was. He was too young to understand why his mother's jaw was clenched, or why she kept checking her phone without unlocking it. Her mother finally broke the silence. "Is this about him?" Talia didn't answer. Her mother sat beside her. "You want my opinion?" "Not really. Then I'll keep it short. You're allowed to be scared. Just don't confuse fear with wisdom." Talia sighed. "I'm not running." "No, honey. You're hiding." She didn't reply, because deep down she knew it was true. That night, after Luca fell asleep, she lay in the guest room staring at the ceiling. She kept thinking about that moment on the porch after their last walk. His hand in hers. No pressure, no performance, just quiet honesty. But she also thought about that article, the comments beneath it, the way people chewed up women like her, women who didn't fit the billionaire image. Women who became collateral damage in someone else's success story. She couldn't be that. Not again. The next morning, she drafted a message. Simple, blunt. "This was a mistake. You don't need this kind of trouble. And neither do I. I need time. Please don't contact me right now." She hovered over the send button. Paused. Her thumb clicked it before her heart could stop her. Miles read it, standing in the middle of his kitchen. His phone buzzed once. He picked it up. Read it twice. No anger, no confusion. He understood exactly what had happened. Ariella, the press, the headlines, the attention he tried so hard to avoid. He wanted to call her, show up at her door, explain that he hadn't said a word to the press, that he had taken every precaution to protect her name. But none of that would matter right now, because she wasn't reacting to what he had done. She was reacting to what came with him. For the first time, Miles realized something. He wasn't just trying to be a good man. He was trying to become someone she could stand next to without flinching. And that was going to take more than consistency. It was going to take sacrifice. The apartment was dark when Miles arrived. He had the spare key, though he'd never used it until now. Talia had once tossed it to him with a casual, "Only if there's an emergency." He wasn't sure if this counted, but he didn't care. He stepped inside slowly, almost like he didn't want the walls to notice. The place smelled like her, like cinnamon and something floral, maybe a diffuser she kept hidden on a shelf. He stood just inside the door, staring at the shoes lined up neatly by the wall. Luca's tiny sneakers were still there. He wasn't. Neither of them were. Miles moved through the apartment quietly, like someone visiting a memory. He didn't touch anything at first, just walked past the coat rack, the small wooden table with a candle that had been burned down to its last hour. He passed the fridge, still decorated with colorful magnets and drawings. One stuck out, a crooked heart drawn in red marker, the letters M and L scribbled underneath. He stared at it for a long time, not because of what it said, but because he didn't know if the M was for him or for Mom. That thought broke something open inside him. He sat down on the couch and leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped tightly. It wasn't anger he felt. It wasn't even grief. It was the kind of ache that came from knowing you did your best and still didn't deserve the trust you were asking for. Because his best came too late. He stood after a while and walked into the hallway, stopping outside what he guessed was Luca's room. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, the light from the hallway spilled across a small bed lined with stuffed animals. The curtains were navy with stars. A rocket-shaped lamp sat on the floor, casting shadows that looked like dreams. He stepped in and crouched beside the bed. No pictures of him, no signs that he was missed, but also nothing that told him he wasn't wanted. That was the part that gutted him. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the one he had written on the back of a diner receipt. He placed it carefully on the nightstand and stood. He didn't plan to call, didn't plan to follow up. He just wanted to leave something behind that wasn't a headline. Back in the living room, he took one last look around. The room wasn't empty because things were gone. It was empty because she wasn't in it, and she had become the center of his peace before he even realized it. As he stepped out, he paused to lock the door again. He turned the key slowly, as if hoping the lock would give him a sign. A click, a reason, but it didn't. It just locked. Simple, final. He left the key under the mat, then walked down the stairs without looking back. That night, he didn't go home. He drove around the city until the skyline blurred into lights and fog. At one point, he pulled over near Lake Michigan, parked by the edge, and stepped out. The wind bit through his coat. He didn't care. He stood at the edge of the water for what felt like an hour. Then, without drama, he whispered something only the waves would hear. "I'm not giving up, but I'll wait." Miles wasn't used to waiting. His career had been built on fast decisions. Acquire, pivot, solve. But now, he waited. 2 days passed. He didn't call, didn't text. He kept his distance, not out of pride, but respect. If Talia needed space, he would give her that. But space didn't mean silence. He had no idea where she'd gone. But he knew someone who might. On the third morning, Miles knocked on a door he hadn't visited since he met Talia again. It was her mother's, a quiet house on the south side. The lawn was tidy. The porch light was on, even in daylight. He stood there with his hands tucked into his coat, rehearsing the words that still felt strange in his mouth. When the door opened, a woman with graying hair and sharp eyes looked him over. "Miles Carrington," she said flatly. "Mrs. Monroe." He nodded, nervous for the first time in years. She stepped aside, barely. "She's not here. I figured. But you think I'm going to tell you where she is?" she said, crossing her arms. He didn't push. "I'm not here to chase her down," he said. "I'm here because I care about her, and about Luca. Her expression didn't soften. He took a breath. I made a mistake. Not just the night we met. I should have found her sooner. I should have asked more questions. But I didn't. That's on me. Mrs. Monroe looked at him, like she was searching for cracks. She doesn't need your guilt. She doesn't have it, he said. I'm not trying to fix her life. I want to be in it. If she'll let me. That got her attention. She's scared, she said after a moment. You don't grow up scraping coins together and just forget what it feels like. You come into her life with private planes and million-dollar suits. That's not her world. I don't want her in my world, he said. I want to meet her in ours. She didn't give him an address, but she gave him a name. Talia's cousin, Ari, lived on the outskirts of Hyde Park, not far from the community college Talia once attended. She might be there, her mother said. Thank you, Miles replied, meaning it. And Miles, she added, just before he left. Don't break her twice. He nodded, silent. It took him hours to get to the address. Traffic was heavy. He didn't call ahead. He wanted to do this right. The apartment complex was modest, brick exterior, kids playing soccer by the sidewalk. He walked up 3 flights, knocked twice. The door opened halfway. Talia stood there in sweatpants, her hair pulled into a loose bun. No makeup, no filter, just her, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. She leaned against the doorframe. You shouldn't be here, she said quietly. I know. Her eyes stayed guarded. He swallowed hard. But I needed to say this. Face to face. She didn't stop him. She stepped aside, let him in. The living room was small but clean. A borrowed couch, a stack of children's books on the coffee table, a few toys neatly tucked in a basket. Miles stood still, hands in his pockets. She sat on the arm of the couch, not facing him directly. I'm sorry I didn't trust you, she said first, but I overheard enough to jump to the worst conclusion. I understand, he replied. I should have told you about Ariella. She made it sound like you were cleaning up a mess, like me and Luca were liabilities. Miles shook his head. You were never that. Not even close. She looked at him now, and he saw it. The tiredness in her eyes, but also something else. Hope. Fighting not to show. He stepped closer, but not too close. I don't want to fix everything in one day, he said. But I'm not leaving unless you tell me to. Her lips parted, but she didn't speak. I messed up a lot. But I've never meant something more than I meant what I said in your kitchen. She stood slowly, crossed her arms. I'm tired, Miles. Tired of people showing up halfway. Tired of wondering if love always has conditions. He stepped forward, gently. This doesn't have conditions, he said. This has us. Messy, complicated, unfiltered. You don't have to perform for me. You never did. Her eyes welled with tears. She blinked quickly, looked away. You think this ends with a perfect bow? She asked. No, he said. I think it starts with a choice. She stepped forward this time. Their fingers brushed. Not held. Not yet. I'm scared, she whispered. So am I. They stood there, inches apart. He raised a hand to her cheek, but didn't touch. Not until she nodded. And when she did, he cradled her face gently. I'm not leaving, he said again, softer now. I'll show up, even when it's hard, even when you're mad, even when it doesn't make sense. She leaned in, pressed her forehead to his. You better mean that, she whispered. I do. They stayed like that. No kiss, no music, no dramatic lines. Just closeness, and breath, and a beginning. Talia didn't expect him to stay the night, but he did, not in her bed, not even on the couch. He slept sitting upright in the single armchair, jacket folded neatly over his lap, head leaned slightly against the side, as if he were afraid to make himself too comfortable in a space that wasn't his yet. When she woke before dawn, she found him still there, his chest rising steady, his face calm, but with traces of tension even in sleep. She watched for a moment, then walked past him quietly to the kitchen. The kettle went on. The floor creaked. She didn't mean to wake him, but she turned around to see him standing in the doorway, shirt wrinkled, eyes still adjusting to the light. "Good morning," she said. His voice was rough. "Smells like coffee." She handed him a mug. Their fingers brushed. He smiled softly. "Thank you." It was the first morning they'd shared in stillness. No suit, no schedule, no Luca crawling between them. Just the hum of the fridge, and two people unsure of what to say first. "You didn't have to stay," she said, sipping her own cup. "I know." "But you did." He met her eyes. "You needed space." "I wanted to be near, not in the way." She nodded, slowly. The silence returned. Not heavy, just real. "I'm not used to this," she said eventually. "To what?" "Someone showing up like that." He rested his mug on the counter. "I'm not used to it either." They didn't rush to define things. That morning turned into a Sunday walk. That walk led to lunch from a food truck. They ate on a bench near the lake, trading bites and brushing elbows. She laughed at his terrible impression of a duck. He smiled when she stole the last fry. It was light. It was healing. And for once, neither of them tried to skip ahead to what it meant. By Wednesday, they had a rhythm. Miles would pick her up from work, walk with her and Luca back to her place, then head home after dinner. He never asked to stay. She never offered. But each time he left, her fingers lingered on the doorknob. Each time he walked to his car, he looked back. And one night, after she closed the door, she leaned against it and whispered to herself, "I missed him more than I wanted to admit." They didn't talk about Ariella or about the past. Not yet. They talked about favorite movies, bad reality shows, and whether pineapple belonged on pizza. One night, they sat watching reruns on her small TV. Miles asked if she remembered the name of the bartender at that hotel in Denver. Talia blinked. "You mean Joel?" she said. "With the crooked bow tie." He laughed. "Yes, that guy gave me the strongest old-fashioned I've ever had." She grinned. "He gave me water with lime and called it a cleanse." They laughed until their sides hurt. The kind of laughter that comes when something in you finally exhales. Miles started bringing groceries. Not because she asked, but because he noticed the fridge was light. Talia resisted at first, but then one evening she saw how carefully he stocked things. Her brand of oat milk, Luca's favorite cereal, the spicy salsa she only bought on sale. He wasn't trying to impress. He was paying attention. One Thursday, she came home late. Rain had soaked through her coat. She looked tired, drained. Miles was already there. Luca had been picked up from daycare and was coloring at the table. Without a word, he took her coat, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and handed her a warm mug. Not coffee, tea, chamomile. She looked at him like he'd read her mind. "I had a rough board call," he said softly, sitting beside her. "Long day." He nodded. "But it got better the minute I walked in here." She didn't reply. She just leaned into his side, her head resting gently on his shoulder. And for the first time in weeks, she let herself breathe. That night, when he stood to leave, she walked him to the door. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For being this." He touched her cheek lightly, thumb grazing her skin. "I'm not trying to be perfect," he said. "I just want to be honest." She searched his face, then reached up and fixed the crooked knot of his tie. Neither moved. He leaned in slowly. She didn't stop him. Their lips met, soft, slow, unhurried. When they parted, she whispered, "That's the first time since Denver." He smiled gently. "It won't be the last." They stood there in the hallway, still close, still quiet. "I don't want to rush you," he said. "You're not," she replied. "But I need this to be real, not borrowed time." "It is real," he promised. "But I'll go at your pace." Talia looked down, then back at him. "I don't want to lose myself," she admitted. "You won't," he said. "I see you." Her voice was soft. "And you still want this?" With everything, she exhaled slowly. "Okay," she whispered. He kissed her forehead and left. But this time, when the door closed, her heart didn't ache. It fluttered. Because maybe, just maybe, this was becoming something neither of them thought they'd have. Something they both deserved. The invitation came on a Sunday afternoon. Miles was helping Talia rearrange a few bookshelves. Luca was napping, a rare quiet settling over the apartment. The sun filtered through gauzy curtains, casting soft streaks of light on the floor. They had moved a stack of books twice, debated over the order, alphabetical versus color. Coded, before collapsing onto the couch, laughing like kids who had done nothing all day. Miles looked at her, still catching his breath. "Come with me." Talia arched a brow. "Where?" "Next weekend. I have a foundation event in Savannah. It's small, nothing like the flashy fundraisers. Just community people. I'm speaking at a breakfast. Thought it might be good." She hesitated. "You want me to go as what?" He didn't flinch. "As Talia, the woman I'm seeing." Talia tilted her head. "You're not afraid people will talk?" "They always talk," he said. "Let them say something true for once." She considered that, then slowly nodded. "All right. I'll go." Miles smiled, and just like that, something shifted. The hotel in Savannah was quiet, tucked away near a marina. Miles had reserved 2 rooms, separate, as promised. Talia had never stayed anywhere that fancy before. She touched the edge of the bathroom marble, unsure if she should sit on the white bedding. Miles knocked on her door that evening. "I have a surprise," he said. She opened it halfway. "Does it require heels?" "No, just trust." He drove her 10 minutes outside the city, down a dirt road lined with tall trees. At the end stood a small house. Weathered porch, blue paint faded to grey. "What is this place?" she asked. "My past," he said. "I want you to see it." Talia followed him inside. The air smelled of wood and thyme. "This is where I grew up." He walked slowly through the small rooms. "That couch? It was once held together by duct tape and a prayer." He laughed softly. "My mother worked 2 jobs. My father barely spoke. I taught myself stocks with free library books and a cheap laptop that overheated every 20 minutes. Talia listened in silence. "I never brought anyone here," he said. "Not even business partners. It felt too far from who I became." She touched the doorframe gently. "But it's part of who you are." He nodded. "Exactly." She turned to him. "Why show me now?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Because hiding parts of myself never gave me peace. And with you, I want peace." Talia stepped closer. "You built an empire," she whispered. "But you're still that boy, trying to hold things together." His jaw clenched, emotion tight in his throat. "I never wanted pity." "You won't get it from me," she said. "Only respect." He exhaled, a sound between relief and release. They sat on the porch after, drinking sweet tea from a roadside diner. "I never imagined being here again," he admitted. "Does it hurt?" she asked. "No. It feels right now." She leaned her head on his shoulder. That night, he didn't go back to his room. They didn't sleep together, but they stayed close, on the couch in her suite, under a hotel blanket, hands loosely entwined. When morning light spilled through the blinds, she was still resting against him. At the breakfast event, Miles introduced her with confidence, not as his assistant, not as a colleague, simply Talia. The way he said it told the room exactly what she meant to him. Talia watched him speak, passionate, warm, funny in ways the press never showed. And as people came up to shake his hand, he always circled back to her, asked if she was doing all right, made sure she had water, a seat, a break from conversations. One woman leaned over and whispered, "He's different with you." Talia smiled. "He's just himself." On the drive back, Talia looked out the window for a while before speaking. "Do you think it's always going to be like this? Us straddling 2 worlds?" Miles didn't take his eyes off the road. "We don't have to fit into either world. We make our own." She looked at him, steady and sure behind the wheel. For the first time, she believed it. That evening, back in her apartment, She unpacked her things while Miles helped clear out some leftover clutter near the closet. Talia pulled out a small box from the bottom of her suitcase, a faded journal. She paused, then handed it to him. "What's this?" he asked. "My writings. Thoughts. I don't usually share them." He opened to a page dated a few months after Luca was born. "There's this ache I carry, not because I was left, but because I never got to ask why. I want to believe that night meant something, but I don't know how to hope without hurting." Miles swallowed hard. "I was there," he said softly. "Just not in the way you needed." Talia nodded. "But you're here now," she added. And that somehow was enough. They didn't label anything, but it was clear. They were no longer circling each other. They were standing in it, together. The air between them was different now. There was no declaration, no defined relationship status. But Miles started showing up without invitation. He brought takeout on Thursdays. He helped clean the fish tank Talia always forgot. He learned how she liked her coffee, not because she told him, but because he paid attention. Talia stopped pretending she didn't notice, but she didn't give in either, because every quiet moment they shared came with an echo. What if he leaves again? One afternoon, as they sat flipping through a magazine on her couch, Miles reached out to tuck a curl behind her ear. She flinched, not because she was afraid, but because it felt too intimate. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. He pulled his hand back, not offended. "You still don't trust this?" She looked down. "I don't know how to." He nodded, quiet for a moment. "Tell me what scares you." Talia's voice cracked. "That I'll get used to you being here, and one day you won't be." Miles leaned forward, elbows on knees. "That's fair." He paused. "I know how to do exits. I'm used to cutting people off before they can cut me, but I'm tired of doing that." She met his eyes. "I never meant to disappear after that night," he added. "I left early because I had a meeting in New York. I figured if you wanted to reach out, you would." "You didn't leave your name," she whispered. He exhaled. "That's on me." There was a beat of silence. Then she asked, "What scares you?" Miles looked away, then back again. "That I'll never be enough, not emotionally, not relationally. I know how to run companies. I don't know how to stay when it gets hard." Talia's heart tightened. He had said it like a confession. She touched his hand. Not a kiss, not a promise, just presence. And Miles didn't let go. The next few days were quiet but full. He invited her to a charity dinner in Chicago. She declined, not because she didn't want to go, but because she needed to know this wasn't about appearances. He didn't push. Instead, he showed up the next morning with 2 coffees and no expectations. They sat on her balcony. No suits, no pressure. Just a man and a woman, figuring out how to be present. He told her stories from his early days in business, how he'd been turned down by 20 investors in 1 week, how his first office chair broke on day 3, how he used to sleep on the floor with a towel for a pillow. Talia listened, laughing more than once. "You've come a long way," she said. He looked at her, and somehow, this feels like the part that matters most. One night, a storm knocked out the power. Luca was with Talia's mother for the weekend, so it was just them. No lights, no distractions. They sat on the floor with candles lit. Talia made grilled cheese on a gas stovetop. Miles said it was the best meal he'd had all month. The power stayed out for 3 hours, long enough for silence to get honest. "I keep thinking," Talia murmured, "what if we're building something too fragile?" Miles turned to her. "Or maybe we're finally building something real." She met his eyes. The air between them shifted, slow, warm, undeniable. He leaned in, but stopped just before their lips met. "Are you sure?" he asked. Talia didn't answer. She closed the space between them. The kiss wasn't rushed. It wasn't hungry. It was steady, intentional, safe. They didn't sleep together that night. They slept side by side, fully clothed on the couch, limbs tangled, breath aligned. It was more intimate than anything physical, and it scared them both. The next morning, Miles had to leave early for a flight. He paused at her door, suitcase in hand. "I'll be back Wednesday," he said. "Don't disappear on me." Talia smirked. "You're not that easy to get rid of." He chuckled, but his eyes held weight. "Good." The next few days were uneventful, until Ariella called again. She had caught wind of Miles' growing connection to a woman with a kid, and made it clear she wasn't done using that information as leverage. Miles shut her down immediately. But what he didn't know was that Talia overheard the call. She had stopped by his office to drop off a file he left behind. She wasn't snooping, she wasn't eavesdropping. But hearing Ariella's voice mention reputation and family-friendly image made something in her chest crack. She left before Miles could see her, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't answer his call that night. When he returned Wednesday, the apartment was dark. He rang. No answer. Finally, a soft knock behind him. Talia stood by the hallway, keys in hand, eyes tired. "I was out," she said simply. "I figured." Miles stepped closer. "Did I do something?" She looked up. "I heard the call." He froze. "I wasn't trying to listen. I was there. And I heard her. Talia." She raised a hand. "She made it sound like I was a liability." "You're not," he said. Firm. "She's trying to manipulate the situation. I didn't entertain it. I never will." Her voice softened. "I want to believe you." "Then do," he said. "Don't let her voice be louder than mine." They stood there for a long moment. Talia nodded slowly. And just like that, the crack didn't become a break. That weekend, Miles took her to a quiet trail by the river. They walked without talking much. At one point, he stopped. "There's something I didn't tell you," he said. Talia looked at him. "My dad walked out when I was 7. No note, no warning, just left. And I spent my whole life making sure I never needed anyone again." She listened. "But lately," he paused. "I don't want to be that man. I don't want to vanish when life gets hard." Talia's chest ached. "I'm not asking you to fix me," he said. "I'm just asking you not to give up on me." She reached for his hand. "I'm still here." That night, for the first time, they didn't talk about the past. They planned something for the future. A trip. Just the two of them. No pressure, no press, just presence. And maybe, finally, peace. Have you ever let fear stop you from accepting real love? Talia was scared to trust again. Miles was terrified to stay. But somehow, they kept showing up. Their connection is growing, but trust is fragile. And one overheard phone call nearly shattered it. What would you have done in Talia's shoes? Walk away, or hold on to something that finally feels real? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share your favorite moment so far. Like, share, and subscribe if this story speaks to you. Talia hadn't slept all night. Her fingers clutched the warm mug of tea she barely sipped, eyes fixed. On the crack in the living room wall of her mother's apartment, Luca was still asleep in the next room. But her mind wasn't on lullabies or breakfast. It was on the voice she heard the night before, Ariella's voice. She hadn't caught every word, but she didn't have to. It was clear Ariella knew about her and Luca, and was using that knowledge to get something from Miles. And Miles hadn't pushed her away. That part echoed loudest. Not the part where he eventually said no. Not the part where he called Ariella out. Talia had walked away too fast to hear any of that. Her chest tightened. She wanted to believe he meant all the things he'd whispered in their quiet moments, that they were building something real. But her past was filled with letdowns, with people who smiled in her face and let her down the second things got hard. Now Miles, this man who was supposed to be different, was caught in the same trap. And maybe she was foolish to think she could ever fit in his world without being used as leverage. Her phone buzzed. A text from Miles. "Can I come by later?" She stared at the screen, then placed it face down on the table. She didn't respond. 2 hours later, Miles stood at her door. Talia didn't expect him to come. She hadn't answered his text. But here he was. No suit, no bodyguards. Just jeans, a hoodie, and an expression that was equal parts tired and determined. Her mother answered the door. He gave a polite smile. "Hi, Mrs. Monroe. Is Talia home?" She gave him a long, unreadable look, then stepped aside. She's in the kitchen. She might not want to talk to you. I'll take my chances. He stepped inside. The apartment was small, too small for someone raising a child alone. And yet, it felt more like home than his penthouse ever had. Talia didn't turn when he entered. She just stood at the sink, washing an already clean dish. Miles cleared his throat softly. I came because I didn't want to let silence do what we haven't. She stayed quiet. He tried again. I didn't know Ariella would show up. I didn't want you to hear any of that. But you didn't hear the whole thing. Talia turned slowly, arms crossed. Her voice was steady but cool. I heard enough. She knew about Luca. That means you've been talking about me and my son. I told one person. One, a legal advisor, in confidence. Ariella must have overheard something or dug through records. You know her kind. They don't stop until they find dirt. And I'm the dirt? She snapped. No. He stepped forward. Talia, you and Luca are the only part of my life that doesn't feel like a performance. I didn't tell her. She's manipulating what little she knows to control me. Talia's eyes searched his. Why didn't you tell me she'd come back into your life? Because she wasn't in it. Not really. She showed up uninvited. Popped up at events. Called from different numbers. She wants the image of us, not the real thing. And I didn't want to give you more to worry about. That's not your call, she said. If we're building something, you don't get to shield me. You let me in. Or you don't. Miles sighed, dropping his hands to his sides. He looked like he'd run a marathon. I've never done this, he admitted. This honesty. I've spent my whole life controlling the narrative. I don't know how to be messy, vulnerable. I'm trying, but I'm scared too. Talia blinked. She hadn't expected that. Not from the man who always looked polished, in control. But here he was. Voice raw, eyes pleading. I'm scared, he repeated. But I'm more scared of losing you than of being seen. Silence hung thick between them. Finally, Talia exhaled. I need time, she whispered. Miles nodded. I'll wait. He stepped back. For what it's worth, I told her no. I chose you. Then he left. That night, Talia sat by the window, watching the city lights blink across the skyline. Her heart was torn between pain and understanding. She had spent so long protecting herself, but maybe she'd gone too far. Maybe it was easier to assume men like Miles would always let you down. That way you wouldn't be surprised. But what if this time she was wrong? 3 days passed. Miles didn't call. He didn't text. He respected her wish for space, even though it tore at him. Each night, he stared at his phone, tempted to check in, to ask how Luca was, to say goodnight, even if she didn't respond. But he didn't. Instead, he poured himself into work, took client calls, held strategy meetings. But his focus was shattered, because while he was leading teams, his mind was stuck on one woman. He remembered her laugh the night they baked cookies, how she danced with Luca in the kitchen barefoot, how her eyes lit up when she talked about getting her associate's degree, something she thought was out of reach a few years ago. Talia Monroe had never belonged in his world, but now he didn't want a world without her in it. Talia tried to move through her own routine, but nothing felt steady. At work, the firm buzzed with the usual chatter, but she kept her head down. She didn't want curious glances or whispered comments. Everyone knew Miles had ties to the firm, and while they hadn't made anything official, she suspected the rumors had started. She didn't care about gossip. She cared about whether she had made a mistake by walking away too quickly. Her mother noticed it too. Talia, she said gently one night, setting down a cup of tea, you're punishing a man for someone else's sin. Talia blinked. What do you mean? I mean, you're acting like he lied, like he used you. But baby, that man came to this house and looked at your son like he was the center of his world. Do you know how rare that is? Talia swallowed hard. I don't want to be someone's weak spot. I don't want to be used to control him. Then talk to him, her mom said firmly, before someone else talks louder. The next day, she took an early lunch break and walked into Carrington Sky Investments. The receptionist recognized her but didn't ask questions. She simply picked up the phone, murmured something to the assistant upstairs, and gestured toward the elevator. Talia stepped in and pressed the top floor. She hadn't been here since their first awkward co-parenting meeting, back when Luca was barely crawling. The sleek glass walls, the modern decor, it all screamed success. But none of that impressed her. She wanted answers. Clarity. When she stepped into his office, Miles looked up from his desk. He didn't rise immediately, didn't flash a charming smile or pretend he wasn't surprised. He just looked tired and relieved. "You came," he said quietly. Talia nodded. "Can we talk?" He stood then and walked over, gesturing to the private lounge area near the window. They sat opposite each other, no distractions, just the truth between them. "I shouldn't have run," she began. "I overheard something, and I panicked. I didn't give you a chance to explain. That's on me." He shook his head. "You had every right to be cautious. I should have told you about Ariella the moment she showed up again." "I wasn't afraid of her," Talia admitted. "I was afraid of what being with you would mean. Constant attention, people looking for stories, judging me, judging Luca, judging us." Miles leaned forward. "Talia, I can't erase the world's judgment, but I can promise you this. I will never hide you, or let anyone disrespect you. If you want to go public, we'll do it together. If you want to stay private, I'll make sure no one bothers you. Whatever you need, I'll protect it." Her eyes glistened. "Even if it costs you deals, investors?" He smiled faintly. "Let them walk. You and Luca matter more than signatures on a paper." They sat in silence for a long beat. Talia finally reached for his hand. "I want this. I just don't know how to do it your way." "I don't want it my way," he replied, curling his fingers around hers. "I want it our way." Later that evening, Miles asked if he could drive her home. She hesitated at first, but something about the way he waited patiently shifted her heart. They rode in silence for most of the drive, but right as they turned onto her street, he said something that stayed with her long after the car stopped. "I didn't grow up with love in my house," he said quietly. "I grew up with deals, debt, cold dinners. I don't know how to be perfect, Talia, but I know how to stay, and I'm not going anywhere." She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Her hand squeezed his gently, and in that moment, it was enough. The days that followed didn't fix everything, but they felt different. There were no grand announcements or sweeping gestures, just effort. Honest, steady effort. Miles started picking Talia up after work. Not every day, but when he could. They'd talk in the car about things that didn't involve business or parenting. Music, childhood memories, the books they liked. She was surprised when he admitted he loved old westerns. He was shocked when she said she'd never been on a plane. "You've never traveled?" he asked one evening, glancing over at her at a red light. "Not far," she said. "We couldn't afford it. And then, with Luca, I just never had the time." He looked thoughtful. "I've flown 1,000 miles for things that didn't matter. But the idea of flying somewhere with you? That feels like something I've been waiting for." She smiled softly but didn't say anything. That kind of promise scared her more than it should. At home, Talia sat with her mom one night after Luca had gone to bed. They sipped hot chocolate in mismatched mugs. Her mom asked gently, "You good?" "I think so," Talia whispered. "It's like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like maybe this is too good to be real." Her mom leaned back, thoughtful. "That's what being loved after heartbreak feels like. It's not about waiting for something bad. It's learning to believe something good can stay." Talia looked down at her mug. "He makes me feel seen, like I don't have to be anyone else." "Then let yourself be seen, baby. Stop hiding behind what you survived." Miles invited her over to his home the following weekend. Not the penthouse where deals were made and staff hovered, but the house outside the city, the one no one knew about, where he escaped when he didn't want to be anyone's CEO. She stepped inside, surprised. The space was warm, cozy, filled with dark woods, natural light, and a wall of books. "I thought you'd live in something sterile," she teased. He chuckled. "That's what I let people think. This house is mine, all mine. I don't even let staff stay overnight. She wandered to the mantel. A small photo caught her eye. Him at 10, standing next to a man with tired eyes and a woman with her back turned. Your parents? She asked gently. My father drank too much. My mother left when I was 12, he said. I moved around, slept on couches, learned how to clean myself up just enough to impress mentors. She looked at him. That's why you never relax, isn't it? He nodded. Because I'm always afraid it'll all fall apart. Talia stepped closer. It won't. Not if we hold it together. You're not alone, Miles. He exhaled slowly, like something deep inside him had been waiting to hear those words. That night, they sat by the fireplace. No expectations, no pressure, just warmth between two people learning how to share silence. Miles shifted closer. I thought I knew what success was, but I think I had it all wrong. How so? She asked. Success isn't control, or press features, or stock gains. It's peace. Peace. When you're next to someone who makes your chest feel quiet. She looked over at him. I haven't felt quiet in years. He brushed her knuckles gently. Then let's be quiet together. They didn't kiss. They didn't rush. But in the stillness of that moment, something shifted. Something deeper than desire. It was trust. Slow building. Unshakable. The next day, Miles took Talia and Luca to a quiet park just outside the city. It wasn't about a big family outing. It was about simplicity. They brought sandwiches, a picnic blanket, and a toy kite that Luca struggled to keep in the air. Talia watched as Miles ran beside their son, laughing when the kite dipped too low. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Later, while Luca napped under the sun, Miles lay beside her. You asked me once if that night was a mistake, he said. She nodded. I used to think love came with warning signs, checkpoints, rules, but you happened outside all that, and I'm glad. She turned to him. Even with everything. He smiled, especially with everything. She didn't cry. She didn't smile too wide. She just leaned her head against his chest and whispered, Me too. And for the first time in a long time, they both believed they could build something that didn't need to be perfect, only true. The start of fall arrived with a subtle chill, and Talia noticed Miles becoming quieter. Not distant, just heavier in thought. They still saw each other often. They still laughed, talked, even stole quiet moments in between meetings or weekend errands. But something was shifting. It wasn't between them. It was inside him. She felt it. One night, while folding laundry in her small apartment, her phone buzzed. Miles, can I come by? She replied yes, assuming he needed to drop something off for Luca. But when he showed up, it was just him. No briefcase, no driver, no suit. Just jeans, a plain t-shirt, and the most unguarded expression she'd seen on him since the night they met. Talia opened the door wider. Everything okay? Miles nodded. Can we talk? She stepped aside. They sat at her kitchen table. The room smelled like cinnamon. She'd been baking muffins earlier. Miles stared at his hands before speaking. I have to tell you something. Something I haven't told anyone in a long time. Talia waited. I saw her last week. Her? She asked softly. My mum. He looked up. She reached out through someone, said she was sick, stage 4 liver disease. Talia's breath caught. I hadn't seen her in 20 years, he said. But I went. I needed to know if she was real, if she felt anything. Talia didn't interrupt. She said she never wanted to leave. But she couldn't handle the pressure. That watching my dad fall apart broke her. So she ran. Did it help? Talia asked. He shook his head. No, it opened up everything I buried. The anger, the confusion, the questions. He leaned back. I realized I built my life trying to prove to ghosts that I was worthy of staying. Talia blinked. That truth landed heavy. Miles added, and I don't want to carry that into what we're building. She reached across the table, covered his hand with hers. You're not that boy anymore. You're a man. One who shows up, even when it's hard. I'm trying, he whispered. You're doing it. That weekend, he invited her to a fundraiser. It wasn't a flashy gala. It was a local outreach dinner for displaced youth. Miles was one of the key donors, though few people knew that. She wore a soft green dress. He wore a tailored charcoal suit. When they walked in hand, murmurs rippled. Talia wasn't used to attention like that. She felt eyes on her, not cruel, just curious. Miles noticed. He leaned in and whispered, "Ignore them. You're here with me." Talia smiled. "I know. I'm proud of that." He grinned, quietly thrilled. After the speeches, a young woman came up to Miles. Her eyes were bold, her presence sharp. "Miles," she said smoothly, "I didn't think I'd see you tonight." Talia's posture straightened. He responded, "Ariella, didn't know you were part of this." She shrugged. "Philanthropy looks good on paper." She glanced at Talia. "And this must be—" "Talia," he said firmly. "My partner." Ariella smirked. "Nice to meet you." Talia responded politely. But she felt the shift. A woman like Ariella didn't show up without reason. After she left, Talia asked, "That's her, isn't it?" Miles nodded. "The investor, the one who threatened to go public." Talia didn't flinch. "Why is she here?" "I don't know, but I'll find out." They left shortly after. In the car, Miles looked over. "I want to be clear. She means nothing to me, and I won't let her ruin what we have." Talia met his eyes. "I believe you, but you need to shut her down, firmly. No business strings, no favors." "I will," he promised. She looked out the window. "Because next time, I won't wait for her to try anything." Miles took her hand. "You won't have to." The next morning, Miles showed up at his office earlier than usual. His assistant was startled to see him already at his desk when she arrived. He didn't wait for Ariella to reach out. He scheduled a private meeting. When she walked into the Carrington Sky executive conference room, she was dressed in designer black, all confidence and polish. But Miles wasn't playing polite anymore. "Let's get this over with," he said, standing at the window. Ariella tilted her head. "You've changed, Miles." "No. I've stopped pretending." She placed her bag on the table. "You used to be strategic, calculated. You knew how to play the game." He turned around. "This isn't a game." She shrugged. "Then don't treat it like one. I have investors depending on me. Your name gives weight. Endorse me and I'll back off." He narrowed his eyes. "So we're clear. If you go public with anything personal, I will have my legal team on you before your next breath. My son is off limits. Talia is off limits. And your threats are done." Ariella didn't flinch, but her smile slipped. "You were never soft," she said. "But you're definitely different now." "I finally know what I want," Miles said. "And it's not you, your company, or your leverage." He stepped closer. "I'll donate to the charity directly, but I will never tie my name to your project. Not now. Not ever." Ariella exhaled, muttering, "Then you better pray she's worth the fallout." Miles didn't respond. He opened the door. "We're done." She walked out without another word. Later that day, Miles texted Talia. "Miles, handled." Talia, handled, like, "Miles, let's talk tonight. Face to face." At her apartment, he explained everything. Every word spoken, every line drawn. Talia listened quietly. When he finished, she nodded slowly. "Thank you for protecting us." He stepped closer. "You don't have to thank me. It's what I should have done the first time." She touched his arm. "It matters that you did it now." Miles swallowed. "I meant what I said, Talia. This isn't about guilt or responsibility. It's about love." She blinked, lips parting slightly. "I love you," he said. "Not because we have a child, not because it makes sense, but because I can't imagine a life where you're not in it." Talia's breath caught in her throat. He stepped back. "But I know you're still healing. I won't push. I'll wait as long as it takes." Talia didn't speak right away, but she didn't pull away either. Over the next few weeks, things steadied. They went to dinner more often, quietly, away from press or luxury. Talia let herself enjoy the calm, the attention, the rare feeling of being seen. One Saturday evening, while strolling through a community street fair, Miles bought her a bracelet from a local vendor. Nothing extravagant, just a simple piece with tiny hand-carved stars. "It reminded me of you," he said. "Quiet light. Always there, even when the sky's dark." She touched the bracelet gently. "You don't need to say perfect things." He smiled. "They're only perfect because they're true." She leaned in and kissed him. Slow, meaningful, with no hesitation. That night, they didn't part at the door. In the morning, Talia woke in Miles' penthouse apartment. It felt surreal, not because of the setting, but because of how natural it felt. She found him on the balcony, sipping coffee, barefoot. She wrapped a blanket around herself and stepped out. "You always up this early?" He glanced over, smiling. "Only when I want to memorize mornings like this." She chuckled. "Smooth. Serious." She walked over, resting her head on his shoulder. "I'm still scared," she whispered. "I know," he said. "But I'm more scared of walking away from this," she added. Miles turned toward her. "Then stay." 2 weeks passed. Talia stood in her modest kitchen, packing Luca's overnight bag. He was heading to her mother's again, this time for a full weekend. Not because she needed space, but because she was choosing to spend time with Miles without distractions, noise, or fear. She had asked for time, and Miles had honored it. Now, she was choosing them. As Luca left with her mother, Talia paused at the door, watching the car drive off. She wasn't running anymore, and she wasn't unsure. She was ready. That evening, she arrived at Miles' place wearing a forest green dress, soft, simple, and elegant. Her curls were pinned up, and her earrings swayed gently when she walked. Miles was waiting in the hallway with dinner already laid out. He froze when he saw her. "You look," his voice caught, "like everything I never knew I needed." Talia smiled. "You always say the right things." "Not always," he admitted. "But tonight, I don't want to say too much. I want to show you something." He walked her into the study, the room he'd rarely let anyone else enter. On the desk sat an old, worn photo album. Talia tilted her head. "What's this?" "My life before Carrington Sky," he said. He opened the first page. A faded photo of a narrow apartment, plastic chairs on a cracked porch. A younger version of Miles stood barefoot with a paper cup in hand. "My mom used to say, 'We may not have much, but we have pride.' I didn't understand then how hard she worked to keep the lights on." He flipped to another page. His high school diploma, then a tiny studio where he slept on a couch during his first job as an intern. Talia stood beside him, fingers grazing the images. "I don't show this to anyone," he said, "because most people only want the final product, not the messy parts." She met his eyes. "I want all of it." He closed the book. "I want you," she added. "The man who built this life, yes, but also the boy who grew up in that apartment." Miles stepped forward, holding her hands. "You're the first person who's ever said that to me." They didn't kiss. Not right away. They just stood there, holding one another, the silence between them saying more than words ever could. Later that night, after dinner and slow music playing in the background, Talia curled up beside him on the couch. She looked around. Everything was beautiful, but that wasn't why she stayed. She stayed because of the peace. Miles looked down at her. "What are you thinking?" She hesitated. "That for the first time in a long time, I feel safe." He pulled her closer. "Then I'm doing something right." They stayed like that for hours. No tension, no conflict, just warmth. When she eventually drifted off, Miles covered her with a blanket and kissed her forehead. He didn't need grand gestures anymore. He just needed this, her trust. By morning, they were closer than they'd ever been, and that Sunday evening, as they walked through the park with coffee in hand, Miles stopped beneath a large tree. He turned toward her. "I was going to wait," he said, "but I don't think I need to anymore." Talia blinked. "Wait for what?" He reached into his coat and pulled out a small silver box. No audience, no press, No spotlight. He opened it. Inside, a simple ring. No diamonds, just a silver band, etched with the words, real, true, us. I don't want to propose with fireworks or boardrooms watching, he said softly. I just want to ask you something important. Talia held her breath. Will you be mine? Not out of obligation, not because of Luca, but because you want this, every day with me. Tears welled in her eyes. She nodded. Yes. He slipped the ring on her finger. They didn't cheer or shout. They just kissed. Slow, intentional, certain. The kind of kiss that said, we've both been through storms, and now we choose each other. The air was still that morning. Not quiet, still. The kind of stillness that made you feel like time had slowed down just for a moment. Talia stood in front of the mirror in her mother's bedroom, adjusting the collar of her crisp white jumpsuit. She'd picked it herself, not because it was trendy or expensive, but because it felt like her. Simple, powerful, and unbothered by anyone's expectations. Luca was in the living room, fidgeting with a small velvet pillow. The rings were tied in place with satin ribbon. He didn't fully understand what was happening, but he knew this day was about his people. His mum, and the man who had quietly become part of their world. Miles waited at the park. No tux, no red carpet. He wore a tailored navy suit. His cufflinks had no logo. His watch, old and worn. The one his mother gave him when he landed his first client. This wasn't for anyone else. No headlines, no shareholders, just them. When Talia arrived, the wind brushed her curls back. Her mother held her hand for a moment, then let go with a smile. Miles turned when he heard her steps on the stone path, and he froze. Not because of the white, not because of the moment, but because of her. She wasn't a fantasy. She wasn't a role. She was real, and she had chosen him. Talia walked to him slowly. Her heels clicked softly on the path, but all Miles could hear was his heartbeat. They stood beneath the old oak tree, the same one they'd passed on their first quiet walk through this park months ago. A simple arch made of branches framed them. Nothing fancy. Nothing rented. Their officiant, a close friend of Talia's mother, smiled as she began the short ceremony. Miles took Talia's hands. I never thought I'd be this man, he said. But you saw him before I did. You softened the parts of me I had buried deep. I want to grow old with you. Not in mansions, but in the small things, in burnt toast, in shared silence, in the hard days and the light ones. He turned to Luca briefly and smiled. I wasn't there when your story started, little man. But I'll be there for every chapter you let me in on. Talia's eyes glistened. She cleared her throat. I used to think love had to be dramatic, loud, big. But you taught me love can be quiet, steady, safe. And I promise to give you that every day. Even when I'm tired, even when we argue, even when life gets heavy. Their friend nodded, holding back tears. With the power given to me, I pronounce you partners in love, life, and everything that comes with it. Miles leaned in and kissed her, slow, steady. The wind blew gently through the tree's branches. Luca clapped. Talia laughed through her tears, and just like that, they weren't two people with separate paths anymore. They were one family, built not from a plan but from a choice. Later that evening, the sun dipped low behind the city skyline. The reception wasn't in a ballroom. It wasn't catered. There were no champagne fountains or photographers. Just a backyard, string lights, folding chairs, and love. Friends and family filled the space with laughter and stories. Talia's mom made her famous lemon cake. Miles's assistant, Gwen, showed up with homemade rolls and surprised everyone by admitting she used to be a baker before real estate. There was no seating chart, no speeches from best men, just people who mattered. Talia sat beside Miles on a weathered bench near the fence, her hand tucked into his. You know, she said, this isn't what people expect when they think millionaire CEO wedding. Miles looked around at the lawn, the paper plates, the toddlers chasing bubbles. I used to think I needed flash, he said. But none of that ever felt this right. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Across the yard, Luca ran after a butterfly, his laughter filling the air. They both smiled, not because it was perfect, but because it was theirs. Later, as the crowd thinned and the lights dimmed, Miles pulled Talia away for a quiet moment. They stood by the porch steps, arms around each other. "I thought about proposing with a headline," he whispered. "Something loud. Maybe on a billboard." She chuckled. "I would have run the other way." "I know." He smiled. "That's why I didn't." He paused. "I wanted this to feel like us, like the night we met. No suits, no titles, just two people. Real." Talia's eyes softened. That night changed everything. Miles brushed a curl from her cheek. "It wasn't a mistake." "I know." They didn't say more. They didn't need to. As the night wound down, Talia changed into a loose hoodie and jeans. Miles rolled up his sleeves. They moved around the yard, picking up paper cups and folding chairs. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't how tabloids would cover a billionaire's wedding. But it was theirs. And it was enough. At one point, Talia looked over and saw Miles showing Luca how to properly stack the plates without them falling over. The boy watched carefully, mimicking his movements. Miles caught her gaze and smiled. Talia didn't tear up this time. She simply nodded, as if to say, "Yes, this is real." By midnight, the house was quiet. Luca was asleep on the couch, wrapped in a blanket. Miles and Talia stood in the kitchen, sharing leftover cake from the same plate. No music, no words, just soft smiles, worn-out feet, and full hearts. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the blinds, casting warm streaks across the living room floor. The house was still, peaceful, no alarms, no schedules, just the start of something permanent. Miles sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee from a plain mug. No monogram, no staff, just him and the stillness. Across from him, Talia entered in an oversized shirt, barefoot, hair a little messy, eyes soft with sleep. She paused when she saw him. "I didn't think you'd be up this early," she said. "I didn't want to miss it," he replied. "Miss what?" "This, waking up with you. Our first day, as us." Talia smiled, walked over, and sat beside him. Later that day, they took a walk down the street, holding hands like it was second nature. No cameras, no one asking questions, just two people in love, learning what peace felt like. At a small corner cafe, they sat across from each other. A waitress recognized Miles but didn't say anything. She just smiled knowingly and brought them their coffee. Talia stirred hers slowly. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Miles nodded. "Does any part of you miss the old life? The control, the headlines, the noise?" He thought for a second. "Sometimes I miss the illusion of it," he admitted. "But it never gave me what this does." She raised an eyebrow. "Which is?" He reached across the table, brushing her hand with his thumb. "Clarity, connection, a place to land." Talia looked down, trying not to get emotional, but her heart felt full. Later that afternoon, Luca stayed with Talia's mom while Miles took Talia on a surprise drive. No clue where they were going. He simply told her, "You'll understand when we get there." They drove past the city, onto winding roads surrounded by trees just starting to turn gold with the season. Eventually, they pulled up to a small plot of land. A single tree stood in the center, leaves swaying gently in the wind. Talia stepped out and looked around. "What is this?" Miles walked beside her. "I bought it years ago. Told myself I'd build something here one day when I finally felt settled." She turned to him, confused. "Settled?" He nodded. "I wasn't ready then. I didn't know what home meant, but now I do." Talia swallowed hard. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a blueprint. "A small house," he said. "Big enough for laughter, quiet enough for peace. Room for weekend pancakes, bedtime stories, and moments like this." Talia covered her mouth with one hand. "This isn't a dream, is it?" Miles shook his head. "No, this is our life." Back home that night, after Luca had gone to bed, Talia and Miles stood at the kitchen sink, washing the last of the dishes. No fireworks, no milestones, just a rhythm forming between two people choosing each other, again and again. As the faucet dripped and the window fogged from the warm water, Miles turned to her. "I know we didn't start perfectly. I know I made mistakes, but I want to build the rest of our story intentionally." Talia nodded, placing the last dish on the rack. "You already are." In the hallway, a framed photo hung beside the light switch. Not a wedding portrait, not a magazine cover. Just one of the three of them, sitting on the porch, barefoot, laughing, a little sunburned. Real, unfiltered, the kind of love no press release could capture, the kind that stayed. Their story didn't begin with a fairy tale. It began with a mistake that led to love, trust, and forever. Have you ever had something unexpected change your whole life? Not in a flash, but in quiet, consistent steps. Miles and Talia chose each other, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. No headlines, no perfect timing, just real commitment. Do you believe love can start messy and still end beautifully? Tell us in the comments, what was your favorite moment in their journey? Like this video if it moved you. Share with someone who still believes in second chances. Subscribe for more powerful, life-changing love stories from Mr. Charles Stories.